going, we don't need roads.
Well, I'm going to put a whole package together, sort of about the new music, but I'm also working on a second package about which is a love letter to the films, a lot of the films that you made, and how I was sort of raised on them. And so I have a couple of questions about that, if you don't mind.
Sure, let's do it.
So my leadoff question for that I wanted to ask you is a big, broad question, but really it's, in your opinion, as someone who is a master of this, what makes a great movie monster?
A great movie monster is how it looks, and is it believable? So if I'm sitting in an audience watching, and do I believe that the monster is there, or is it a guy in a suit, or is it a puppet, or what is it? And do a convincing monster is hard, real hard.
Well, to that point, you've mastered both human monster and obviously otherworldly. I mean, I did a John Carpenter marathon just in my home. I had a weekend. My girlfriend was working. I didn't really have anything to do. And I said, I'm going to go through the films of John Carpenter. And it amazed me how you were able to approach so many different monsters in so many different ways. I'm curious, as a storyteller, as a master of this genre, what is the difference between a more humanized, grounded monster like Michael versus, you know, the monster, you know, the Thing, or the creatures in They Live? How do you approach them differently?
The honest answer is the story. And the story drives you. So that's where you start, and you work out from there. What is the narrative? What's the story about? Much more so than, oh, let's sit down and create a monster. Mm-hmm. That comes much later after you've worked out your story.
To that point, you know, obviously every great monster is only as good as the protagonist, as the person or persons that's going to go toe to toe with them. You have had some of the greatest in the history of cinema. In the development of both of them, do you develop them sort of parallel together, or what's the process of creating the protagonist to the antagonist?
Well, in general, a monster is the other. It's not us, the other tribe, the other race, the other creature. So we humans, the people who fight the monster, are the stand-ins for all of us, for all of humanity. Mm-hmm. So it's just us, and it's how convincing that you make, how you portray us, and how we react to the creature, how, oh my God, look at that thing there. It's all the emotions that you go through. Is what the protagonist is all about.
You know, I whenever I rewatched The Thing recently, and you know, like many people who love your work, I've probably seen it more times than I can count. It really made me miss the days when filmmakers couldn't use CGI and couldn't use special effects to just sort of if you wanted to have a dog that burst open and tentacles go everywhere, you had to find a way to do it. Going back to sort of what we were talking about with music, do you sort of miss those days of necessity being the mother of invention, where you didn't have a computer to do things? You had to figure it out for yourself.
Well, having computer-generated images is not as easy as you might think. You don't just dial it up. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of work. It's as much work as creating a rubber monster that does something. It's just a different technology to get the same place. Depends on what you want your monster to do. Is you want it to move around the room? Mm-hmm. Well, it's probably going to have to be, if you're doing it in this rubber, you're probably going to have to do it in cuts. And but if you're doing a computer-generated image, you can move it around, you know, see it in one shot. So it's different.
Fair enough. Well, you have directed some of the greatest death scenes of all time. I still get chills whenever I see Michael kind of like turn his head and kind of like almost like studying his kill. And I'm sort of curious at how you, as a director, approach those days as opposed to any other, or do those days feel different? Are they just normal days shooting a death scene?
Well, most actors, if they're going to die in a movie, they know how to do it. Mm-hmm. That's something we as kids, we play when, you know, I shoot you, you know how to die. So it's not a big mystery unless you have something special in mind. And then you choreograph it out. And it just seems to work. It's not a big mystery. There is no secret to it.
Mhm. Well, you make it look good. I can tell you that.
Thank
You know, whenever you are on the ground floor of something as incredible as Halloween and Michael Myers, or any horror genre for that matter, the downside is that eventually you're probably going to have to let it go and see other people take it in different directions. And I'm just sort of curious, what's that like as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, sort of crafting something that's yours and then kind of accepting the fact that you have to sit back and, for better or worse, watch other people do things with it?
Well, mine will never die. My original is always there. And it's always fun to see what other people do with it. I think it's very flattering, and I think it's terrific. And the new movies, I'm a associate producer on the new Halloween movies, are unbelievably good. David Gordon Green is a great director. So I'm really proud of what he's done. So it can live. All these years later, Michael can live.
You know, I mentioned at the beginning of this interview that I grew up on these movies. You know, my sister was 7 years older than me. We had them all on VHS. She was afraid to watch them alone, so she'd pull her little brother over to the couch and say, okay, we're going to watch these, and you're going to watch them. And looking back, like, that was my introduction into film, into cinema. It was like a rite of passage. And I feel like that the horror genre is that rite of passage for so many people at a young age. And I was just wondering if you could speak to that. And it, you know, so many people thinking about the horror genre as a part of their childhood.
Absolutely. I do also. I grew up kind of during the golden age of science fiction. And the golden age of science fiction monsters was in the 50s. And I just love monster movies. And a couple of films were a rite of passage. A couple of films got me up on my feet with popcorn flying. They were really scary for me especially when I was young. But, you know, and you go to see a cat by my side here who accompanies me everywhere. Some of the rubber monster suits were pretty bad. So that wasn't a rite of passage. That was kind of a relaxation. Monsters are fabulous. People have always loved monsters. They've always been around. They've always been in stories. And again, they're the other. And we are the humans fighting the other.
I want to talk about, I guess, the freedom of creating music that isn't necessarily tied to a plot or tied to an image or tied to, you know, a 2-hour confinement of a film. And I guess the difference creating music with that kind of freedom versus music that has to convey a plot and a beat and a story.
Well, it's unbelievable. The music that's just exists for itself. It doesn't have to support a movie, doesn't have to support the dramatics. It's a whole different ball game. And when I first did my first album in 2016, I couldn't believe, wow, look at, I can't believe it. I'm able to, the music is there for itself. It's not for anything else. So it frees you up. And it just lets your imagination, it lets your abilities just soar. Well, my dad was a musician, and I think he secretly always wanted me to have a musical career. I didn't, but so this is about as close as one could get to pleasing my father. It was long gone.
Well, you mentioned not having a musical career, but I mean, you have crafted some incredible music on your end. And so actually I was going to ask you, and maybe this is a stupid question and maybe you already answered it. Do you sort of see yourself as a musician who happens to be really good at making films, or are you a filmmaker that also happens to just be really good at creating music?
Kind of neither of those. I'm a movie director who started in self-defense by doing the music because I couldn't afford anybody else to do it. And that sort of ended up as a trademark. It ended up as another layer of creativity.
Well, adds it's the whole like necessity is the mother of invention. Like you couldn't hire someone to do it, you created it yourself, and look what ended up coming of that.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. I know this was a collaborative process for you, and I'm curious as to, I guess, the different. I know obviously filmmaking very much is a collaborative process because you're working with hundreds of people. What's the difference between collaborating with someone on music versus collaborating with multiple people on a film set?
Well, on a movie, you're collaborating with a lot of people, but as a director, there's certain things I will not collaborate on, and that's the mise en scène, the shot to shot. That's all in something I create and I control. Whereas in music, collaborating with people who are better than I am is absolutely delightful, and I love it. And I easily give up control, easily.
That's so interesting. I was wondering if you would talk to me about, I'm so fascinated with creative people such as yourself and that moment of inspiration. And I'm curious, whenever you sort of have this bug that bites you and you start sort of kind of the wheels start turning, is it a moment where it happens and all of a sudden a light switch turns on, or is it more of a gradual process and you kind of start tapping on things and then you kind of start finding sort of the notes that kind of start putting themselves together?
It's both. It's both the things you just described. Sometimes it's in a blast from heaven. You have it. Oh, bang! Oh, wow! And you start playing it. Other times it's just a feeling, a sense. You start noodling around the edges, coming up with something. I've done it both ways.
You know, many of us are just around the 6-month mark of staying quarantined, and many of us working from home. And I've talked to a lot of creative people such as yourself, and it seems to be split down the middle in that some people tell me, oh, it's been so nice to have this time because I can really think about my projects and I can tinker with them and I can work on them. And the other half have told me it's too much time and I go back and rework stuff that doesn't need to be reworked, and I'm tinkering with stuff that doesn't need to be tinkered with. Where do you fall in that? Have you enjoyed having this time, or do you sort of kind of need that deadline to get stuff done by?
Well, I've enjoyed this time. I think it's great. It isn't really very different than my normal life. I just I kind of exist in an isolation bubble most of the time, and I'm hesitant to go back to work because it's God, is it hard? And I've worked real hard in my life, and I don't want to do that anymore. I want to have a good time in my old age. I want to watch basketball. I want to play video games. That's what I want to do.
Yes, we are. Mr. Carpenter, I could keep going, but I don't want to tie up your whole afternoon. I cannot tell you how much of an honor this was. Like I told you, I had a weekend to myself, and I said, I'm diving in. I'm doing the whole filmography, and I spent my entire weekend watching your films, and it's one of the best weekends I've had since the world shut down. So truly, it's an absolute honor to speak to you, sir. So really, thank you for taking the time to do this.
You're a good man. Take care.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.